The night the aliens arrived, the sky above Earth changed in a way no one could have imagined. It wasn't like the bright, familiar stars that people saw every night. Instead, the sky turned a strange shade of green, almost like the aurora borealis, but much more intense. At first, people thought it was just some kind of natural phenomenon, maybe a rare display of lights or a solar flare. But as the green lights grew brighter, they began to take shape. The patterns were too perfect to be random, forming into circles, triangles, and even symbols. Some of the symbols seemed to spell out words, but in a language no one could understand. Panic spread quickly, but no one knew what was happening. People gathered in their homes, watching the strange lights on their screens, unsure whether to be excited or afraid. The real shock came when the green lights started to fade, revealing something far more massive in the sky. A huge ship, hovering silently above the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't like anything anyone had ever seen. It wasn't a plane, or a satellite, or any kind of military craft that humans had ever designed. It was enormous, almost the size of a city, and it just floated there, still and quiet. It didn't make any noise, and there were no engines roaring like they would be on Earth's spacecraft. The ship was unlike anything in human experience. But it wasn't moving. It just hung in the sky, observing. For hours, the ship didn't do anything but hover. There were no messages sent to Earth, no demands, no signs of aggression. Just an eerie, calm presence. People didn't know if they should be relieved or even more scared. Governments scrambled to make sense of the situation. Military forces across the world went on high alert. But there was no enemy to fight, no declaration of war. They just stared at the ship, trying to make sense of what it meant. Then, without warning, smaller objects began to drop from the large ship. These objects were strange, like floating silver orbs. They drifted silently down to the surface of the planet. As they moved through the air, people could see them clearly. They weren't like any technology humans had ever seen. They were smooth and shiny, floating without any visible support. They looked like something out of a science fiction movie. At first, the orbs seemed harmless. They didn't touch anything. They just floated. But when they reached the ground, they began to move through the streets, into cities, and across different environments. One orb floated through a crowded square in Paris, and people stared up at it, unsure of what to do. Another orb drifted across a desert in Africa, and yet another entered a jungle in South America. All the while, the orbs remained still, as if waiting for something. No one knew what the orbs were doing, but they were clearly searching for something. They weren't attacking, but they were scanning. People grew curious, though also nervous. What were they looking for? And why had the aliens chosen to send these strange objects to Earth? The orbs didn't harm anyone. There were no explosions, no sounds of destruction. But the longer they stayed, the more people realized that they weren't here for any material thing, like gold or oil. They weren't interested in Earth's weapons or treasures. These orbs were looking at something else. They seemed to study the environment, nature, animals, and humans. They focused on things that seemed normal to us, but clearly had a different meaning to the visitors. They were searching, not for power or technology, but something more intangible, something no one could understand yet. For the first time in human history, Earth wasn't the center of the universe. The world had been watched, and we didn't even know why. And in the silence that followed, people realized one important thing. The aliens weren't here for conquest or war. They were here for something much more mysterious. But what exactly? No one could guess. The waiting began, and with it, a strange hope and fear. What were these visitors going to do next? As the days passed, people began to wonder what the aliens were truly searching for. The strange silver orbs continued to float across Earth, drifting through cities, towns, forests, and oceans. At first, many believed the aliens were interested in the material wealth of the planet, gold, oil, or the precious resources that humans prized so much. But soon, it became clear that the orbs ignored Earth's most valuable possessions. They didn't go near any of the world's gold mines or oil fields. They didn't visit any of the massive power plants that generated electricity. The orbs passed by factories and wealthiest cities without a second glance. This was puzzling. If the aliens were so advanced, why weren't they interested in the things humans had worked so hard to accumulate? As the orbs moved on, they continued to act strangely. They didn't seem to be scanning for resources or technology. They seemed focused on something far more personal. The first clue came when an orb entered a small kindergarten in Japan. The children were drawing with crayons on large sheets of paper, and the orb hovered over their artwork. For hours it stayed there, scanning the bright, colorful pictures the kids had made. It seemed fascinated by the simple drawings. The children laughed and continued their work, but they couldn't understand why the orb was so focused on them. It wasn't just an object floating in the air. It was watching them, studying their creativity. The next orb appeared in a small village in Brazil. There, a grandmother sat on her porch, playing a guitar for her grandchildren. The music was soft and comforting, and the children gathered around her, their faces lighting up with joy. The orb floated nearby, watching closely, its tiny lights flickering in time with the music. For 2 days, the orb lingered, showing no sign of leaving. The villagers were curious, but it seemed like the orb had no interest in anything other than the love and happiness shared between the family members. Again, there was no technology, no gold or riches to be found. The orb wasn't scanning for anything that could be touched or owned. It was watching the connection between people, the simple beauty of music, love, and togetherness. In India, another orb arrived, hovering over a girl who was planting a tree in her backyard. She smiled as she carefully dug a small hole, placed the sapling inside, and watered it. The orb floated beside her, studying her every movement. The girl didn't seem afraid. In fact, she didn't even notice the orb at all. She was too focused on the tree she was planting, and the hope she had that it would grow strong. The orb didn't rush off. It stayed with her for hours, almost as if it admired the girl's kindness and patience. It was becoming more and more apparent that the orbs weren't here for anything material. They weren't interested in power or wealth. Instead, they were watching humans closely, as if studying the things that made people human. The way they laughed, the way they cared for each other, the simple acts of kindness and creativity. These were the things the aliens were observing. They were looking for something that couldn't be measured by wealth or technology, something much deeper. It was as if the aliens had discovered that Earth's true value wasn't in its resources, but in its people. As the orbs continued their journey, more and more people began to notice the same pattern. The aliens weren't scanning cities for weapons or searching for something to take. They were drawn to humanity's emotional side, the way humans express themselves through art, music, love, and compassion. The orbs didn't seem to be interested in anything physical. They were fascinated by the intangible, what made humans unique in the universe. The mystery of the orbs deepened, and the world began to realize that the aliens had come not to conquer, but to learn. But what was it that they were learning? What did they hope to discover from Earth's greatest treasures, the heart and soul of humanity? No one knew yet, but there was an undeniable sense that something incredible was about to unfold. After several days of observing, the aliens finally decided to communicate with humanity. It happened suddenly, without warning. The entire world was glued to screens, waiting for some kind of action. When it came, the massive alien ship in the sky, which had been silently hovering, sent out a message. This time, it wasn't just a broadcast of lights or strange symbols. It was a clear, direct message that reached everyone, no matter where they were. The message wasn't in a language anyone knew, but somehow, it was understood by all. The ship spoke, its voice carrying through every phone, radio, and TV across the globe. At first, people could hardly believe their ears. The message began with a calm, almost soothing tone. The voice echoed in every language, a strange mix of sounds that somehow made sense to everyone. "We searched galaxies for what your world hides," it began. People listened, stunned. "We found it not in your weapons or your machines," the voice continued. "We found it in your music, your stories, your laughter, and your care for one another." For a moment, the world was silent. The words were simple, but their meaning was enormous. The aliens had not come for riches, power, or technology. They had come because of something far deeper, something unique to humans. The message continued, explaining that the aliens had visited many worlds in their search for life and meaning, but they had never found anything quite like Earth. "You create beauty in chaos," the voice said. "You fight, yet forgive. You destroy, yet rebuild. Your emotions, though wild, are your greatest strength." The words hit hard. The aliens weren't interested in technology or the material wealth humans fought over. They were fascinated by something that couldn't be measured. They were fascinated by human emotions, the ability to love, to create, to feel. It was as if the aliens had been searching for the secret of life, and they had finally found it in the hearts of people. But the message didn't stop there. The aliens weren't just observers. They had something to offer. They said, "We cannot create like you. We do not feel like you. We came seeking the secret of life, and found it in your hearts." The aliens had learned something important from humanity, something that had eluded them in their travels across the stars. They had discovered the power of human emotion, the creativity, the love, the resilience. It was something that no alien civilization had ever truly understood, and now they wanted to share something in return. The ship released millions of small lights into the sky, and these lights began to float gently over Earth, like thousands of fireflies lighting up the night. The lights touched everything they came in contact with: cities, forests, oceans, and people. And with each touch, something incredible happened. Plants that had withered and died began to grow again. Animals that were sick or injured stood up and healed. Even machines that had been broken for years started to work again. The aliens had given Earth a gift, a touch of harmony, a peace that spread over the planet. It was as if the world itself was healing, brought back to balance. The voice of the aliens returned, and it spoke one final time. "We give you this gift, harmony, a touch of peace for your world, a mirror of what we saw in you. But we ask only one thing. Do not forget what makes you powerful: your stories, your love, your connection." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in history, the world felt united. The aliens had not come to conquer or destroy. They had come to show humanity something about itself, something that no one had ever realized. The greatest strength of humanity wasn't its weapons or technology. It was its heart. With those final words, the alien ship slowly began to rise. The lights that had been floating across the Earth began to fade, disappearing into the sky. And just as quietly as they had arrived, the aliens were gone. The world was left in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of understanding, of realization, of something new that had been born. The aliens had given Earth a gift, and in return, they had learned something that changed everything. The way humans loved, created, and cared for each other had left an indelible mark on the aliens, and on the world itself. It was a gift that would last forever. After the aliens left, Earth was left in a strange, quiet stillness, as if everyone was waiting for something. But something incredible had changed in the hearts of people all around the world. The gift the aliens had left behind wasn't just a touch of peace. It was something deeper. The harmony that had spread over the Earth was more than just a physical change. It had affected the way people saw each other and the world. The emotional connection that humans shared, the things the aliens had admired, became stronger than ever. The kindness that people showed one another began to grow, and there was an overwhelming sense of unity that spread across nations, cultures, and borders. In the days that followed, humans started to rebuild not just the physical world, but the way they treated each other. Governments, once divided by power struggles and greed, began to work together. Countries that had been at war for centuries started talking, listening to one another, and finding ways to cooperate. People began to share more, to care for each other in ways they hadn't before. The once chaotic world began to feel different. No longer was everyone chasing after the same things. There was a shift in priorities. Money, power, and control no longer seemed as important as they once did. Instead, people focused on the things that truly mattered: relationships, kindness, understanding, and the simple joy of being alive. The environment, too, seemed to benefit from the aliens' gift. Forests grew taller, rivers ran cleaner, and the air became fresher. The Earth, which had been scarred by pollution and destruction, began to heal. Species that had been on the brink of extinction started to thrive again. The oceans, once filled with trash, became clearer, and marine life returned to areas that had been long abandoned. People couldn't explain it, but they could see it happening all around them. The world was slowly being restored, as if nature itself had been given a second chance. Human creativity began to soar to new heights. Artists, musicians, writers, and creators from all over the world felt inspired by the changes they had witnessed. People began to use their talents to spread messages of peace, hope, and unity. Music filled the airwaves. Stories of love and compassion spread through books and films, and art expressed the newfound connection that humanity felt to one another. It was as if the world had been given a canvas to create something beautiful, and people were eager to paint a new future together. However, not everyone understood the change. Some were fearful. They didn't trust the peace that had been gifted to them. Some argued that the aliens had interfered too much with humanity's natural course, and they feared what would happen if such a powerful gift was misused. Others saw the shift in the world as a sign that humanity was losing its edge, that without the drive for power and control, humans might become complacent. There were those who longed for the old ways, the old struggles that defined Earth's past. But for the majority of people, the change was a welcome one. They had learned in a very real way what it meant to be connected to others and to the planet. Even with the critics, the world continued to change. People had learned something important. They had learned that their strength wasn't in their machines or their wars. It was in their hearts. And it was this realization that became humanity's guiding force. People began to work together to tackle the big problems of the world: poverty, climate change, disease, and inequality. The sense of unity wasn't just about peace. It was about progress, creating a world where everyone could share in the benefits of what had been gifted to them. The aliens, having left their mark, had changed humanity forever. The gift they left behind was more than just a physical change. It was a transformation of the human spirit. People now saw their world in a new light, and the bond between them was stronger than ever. They no longer needed the aliens to teach them the value of life. The lesson had been learned, and from that day forward, humanity would never be the same. The Earth was different, not just in its environment, but in the hearts of those who lived there. The harmony the aliens had given them had sparked a new era, one of peace, creativity, and love. As time passed, the gift that the aliens had left on Earth continued to shape the future of humanity. The harmony that had spread across the planet didn't just stay in the air. It settled into the daily lives of people, becoming a part of everything they did. The peace that had followed the aliens' departure was not a fleeting moment. It wasn't just a brief dream that faded away. It became a new way of living, one that was rooted in understanding, love, and shared experiences. Nations, once divided by wars and differences, found themselves working together toward common goals. No longer did people fight over territory, wealth, or resources. Instead, they focused on creating a world where everyone could thrive, and where the planet itself could heal. People from all walks of life, artists, leaders, scientists, and ordinary citizens, started to collaborate in ways that had never been seen before. There was a new sense of purpose in the air, a collective desire to do good. With the restoration of the environment, the world became a beautiful place again. Forests grew tall, animals returned to their natural habitats, and the oceans were cleaner than they had ever been in generations. People planted trees, cleaned the oceans, and worked together to protect the Earth. It was as though the planet itself had been given a second chance, and people were determined to make the most of it. The emotional connections that had been so deeply admired by the aliens were no longer seen as just personal, but as essential to the survival of humanity. People began to realize that true strength came not from conquering others or acquiring wealth, but from the love and compassion shared among them. They learned that the things that made them human, their creativity, their ability to connect with each other, and their willingness to work together, were more important than anything else. The most advanced technology didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was the power to create, to love, and to care for the world and each other. While there were still challenges, the people of Earth faced them with new energy and determination. Problems like poverty, inequality, and disease were no longer seen as insurmountable. With the global unity that had been achieved, resources were shared more equally, and communities worked together to lift one another up. New systems were created that valued people over profits and cooperation over competition. There was a collective realization that if humanity could work together, it could solve any problem. And yet, the question lingered. Why had the aliens come? What had they really been searching for? And what had they hoped to find? In the years that followed, scientists and thinkers continued to search for answers. Some speculated that the aliens had been searching for something greater than technology or power. They had been searching for what made life worth living. They had discovered that the key to understanding the universe lay not in the stars, but in the hearts of people. And perhaps, in their quiet departure, the aliens had shown humanity the most important lesson of all, that the universe wasn't about domination or resources, but about connection. Connection to one another, to the Earth, and to something greater than themselves. The peaceful changes that the aliens had sparked in humanity's heart didn't just affect Earth, they rippled out into the cosmos. As humans reached out to the stars once again, they did so with a new understanding. They no longer sought to conquer or control. Instead, they looked to connect with other civilizations, to share the lessons they had learned. the alien encounter, had shifted the very way humanity viewed the universe. It was no longer a cold, distant place full of threats. It was a vast, interconnected web of life and love, waiting to be explored and understood. The legacy of the aliens' visit would never be forgotten. It wasn't about the technology they shared, or the peace they offered. It was about the understanding they brought. That humanity's greatest strength lay not in its machines or its power, but in its ability to love, to create, and to connect. And with that lesson in their hearts, humanity moved forward into the future, ready to face whatever challenges the stars might hold. But now, with the knowledge that the most important thing they could ever discover was the power of human connection.